When the producers of Star Trek The Next Generation began developing a spin-off series in 1992, they knew they wanted this show to be different. They were motivated by a combination of executive direction. Paramount chairman Brandon Tartikoff had suggested a spin-off of TNG and proposed it be set aboard a space station rather than a starship, and a desire to diversify. TNG was still on the air, and producers didn't want to have two Star Trek shows set aboard starships running at the same time. It was a smart direction in which to go, and the early 1990s was the ideal time for the franchise to take a chance and stretch itself a bit. The most recent movie, Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, had been a hit with audiences and critics, and on TV, Star Trek The Next Generation was at the peak of its popularity. Star Trek was as hot as it had ever been, and as they developed what would eventually become Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the producers knew they had room to take a few chances because of that success. One of the biggest chances the creators of Deep Space Nine took, creatively speaking anyway, was to include in the show one of the earliest and most derided failures of its parent series, an alien species that was intended as a fearsome threat but turned out to be a laughingstock. The Ferengi. We're going to talk about why this was such a risk on the part of the creators of Deep Space Nine and how it paid off in this video as we examine how Deep Space Nine actually saved the Ferengi. The Ferengi were introduced in Season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation in the episode The Last Outpost, and right away it was obvious that there were some problems. The Last Outpost positions the Ferengi as mysterious and menacing foes, teasing out their first appearance until the second act of the episode. When the Ferengi do finally show up on screen, they aren't very intimidating. They seem kinda goofy. It's not the ears. The character design for the Ferengi is solid. I've always really liked it. It's a lot more imaginative than the humans with shit on their foreheads makeup that became typical during the TNG era of the franchise. And it's not as if the Ferengi are the only Star Trek aliens that look silly. Vulcans have bowl cuts and elf ears. We're all so used to it now we don't even think about it, but it's wacky as hell. The problem with the Ferengi in their early appearances isn't their look. It's their mannerisms, their personalities, their overall vibe. They're sneering, hissing, cartoon villains who crouch and lurk and cower and bounce around in giddy excitement as they attempt to carry out their deceitful business. To describe them as a little broad would be an understatement. Any 19th century vaudeville producer worth a damn would tell them to take it down a notch. Their over-the-top scheming and obsession with money, particularly gold in The Last Outpost, also almost certainly contributed to the perception of the Ferengi as anti-Semitic. And let me just make this clear. I think that perception is valid. Maybe it's just a coincidence that the Ferengi, with their exaggerated facial features, sharp teeth, and deceitful and conspiratorial natures, share many traits with the racist caricatures that have been used to promote hatred and mistrust of Jewish people for centuries. But whether it's a coincidence or the product of conscious choices on the part of their creators, those anti-Semitic characteristics are there. They're extremely toned down in Deep Space Nine, but they're a legacy of which the Ferengi have never been able to fully rid themselves. If I had to guess, I'd say someone involved in the production of Star Trek The Next Generation at least had some concerns in this area, because in The Last Outpost, Data compares the Ferengi to 19th century Yankee traders, a comparison reiterated by Commander Riker. A helpful reference to bring these new aliens into focus for the audience? Sure. An attempt to anticipate accusations of anti-Semitism by canonically comparing the Ferengi to something other than Jewish culture? I don't know. Maybe. Even if it wasn't taken seriously, I find it very hard to believe it wasn't at least mentioned at some point. Watching episodes like The Last Outpost makes it seem ludicrous that the producers of TNG ever seriously thought the Ferengi could replace the Klingons as recurring foes for the crew of the Enterprise, but on paper, they had the potential to be great villains from the very beginning. In The Last Outpost, Data describes them explicitly as ruthless, amoral capitalists. Such characters would seem to be ideal foils for our heroes. Star Trek The Next Generation repeatedly emphasizes that the Federation economy of the 24th century doesn't use money, and that one of the major leaps of social evolution that allowed for the creation of the Federation's utopian society was humanity and other species moving beyond the acquisition of personal wealth as a primary motivator. What better antagonists could there be for characters who had renounced greed than a group of people who had elevated it to their highest virtue? The greed isn't just good, it's great philosophy also positioned the Ferengi to be socially relevant. The soulless, profit at any price ethos of Wall Street financiers was a prominent aspect of popular culture throughout the 1980s, so having villains who could be portrayed as analogous to those very financiers made sense. Unfortunately, Star Trek The Next Generation just wasn't a very good show during its first season, and when it came to establishing the Ferengi, the producers just kind of blew it. But, like the Never Say Die Starfleet officers on whom the show was centered, the producers didn't give up. They eventually succeeded in creating compelling, recurring villains to antagonize Captain Picard, much as the Klingons had bedeviled Captain Kirk during the classic Trek TV series and films, the Borg, the Cardassians, and, in one particular case, the Betazoids, and they took a few more swings at the Ferengi. The final appearance of the Ferengi as straightforward enemies of Starfleet comes in the episode Peak Performance from late in TNG's second season. In that episode, a Ferengi vessel attacks the Enterprise while it's conducting a war game against another Starfleet ship, the Hathaway, temporarily captained by Commander Riker. It's the last time we see the Ferengi behave nearly so aggressively, at least militarily, beginning with their next appearance in the episode The Price from TNG's third season. They are depicted as opportunistically neutral relative to the Federation, and their obsession with profit becomes their defining trait. The presentation of Ferengi also became more intentionally comedic, which was a smart move by the writers, because most fans found them to be laughable already. Way to steer into the skid, guys. It's like how WWE tried to push Roman Reigns as a babyface, but the fans kept booing him, so the company turned him heel. After 5 years. So, the producers of Star Trek are better storytellers than Vince McMahon, which is a lot like saying Chipotle is a better place to get lunch than the dumpster behind Papa John's, I realize, but it's still a compliment. But while Star Trek The Next Generation did manage to salvage the Ferengi somewhat after their disastrous debut, their rehab wasn't completed until they became a regular presence on Deep Space Nine. Eventually, some of the most compelling, multifaceted, and hilarious characters on the series were Ferengi, which is pretty impressive when you consider how terrible the Ferengi were when they started out on TNG, and how many great characters there were on Deep Space Nine. For this stunning turnaround, unprecedented and unequaled in the Star Trek franchise, we have to thank, of course, the writers of Deep Space Nine, particularly Ira Steven Behr, who wrote or co-wrote most of the significant Ferengi-centered episodes, but we also have to thank the actor who portrayed the show's most important Ferengi character. That actor is Armin Shimmerman, who played Deep Space Nine's resident bartender and black market mover and shaker Quark. Before being cast as Quark, Shimmerman played one of the first Ferengi to appear on TNG. That's him there as Latek, the leader of the Ferengi away team in The Last Outpost. He also played Braktor, commander of the attacking Ferengi ship in Peak Performance. As one of the first actors to play a Ferengi, Shimmerman felt a sense of responsibility to them. He's spoken about this in interviews, including in the Deep Space Nine documentary What We Left Behind. He was disappointed with how the Ferengi had turned out on screen, and when he won the role of Quark, he saw it as an opportunity to reboot the entire species. From the moment we meet Quark in Deep Space Nine's pilot episode Emissary, it's obvious that Shimmerman is trying to do something different with the character. Unlike most of the Ferengi we've seen previously in TNG, Quark doesn't hunch or crouch and skulk around. He walks upright, typically with a confident, carefree swagger. He doesn't snarl or hiss or rub his hands together to indicate his villainy, which makes sense because he's not a villain. He is a schemer, but Shimmerman has subtler ways of showing that than the clowning practiced by early TNG Ferengi. Quark is strongly motivated by a desire to make money, but he also has complexity beyond that. His interactions with his brother Rom and nephew Nog are often tense and rife with conflict, but we see that Quark genuinely loves them, just as he loves his mother, though his connection with her is even more fraught than with Rom and Nog. His relationships with other people aboard the station are frequently antagonistic, and he isn't trusted by many, especially early in the show's run, but we see him form sincere friendships with several of his fellow residents of DS9, including Jadzia Dax and Odo, with whom Quark engages in a constant game of cat and mouse that barely conceals a deep mutual respect and admiration. Quark also gets a few love interests during the course of the series. They only stick around an episode or two, but that's long enough for us to see that Quark has a sensitive, vulnerable side. In other words, through Quark, Armin Shimmerman succeeds in rescuing the Ferengi from being a failed laughingstock. He does the same thing for Ferengi that Michael Dorn as Worf does for Klingons in TNG. He serves as an entry point through which the show can explore and deepen an already established alien culture, and he expands our understanding of that culture by defying some of our expectations and fulfilling others, sometimes in unexpected ways. In other words, he shows us that Ferengi are people too. But it's not just Shimmerman and it's not just Quark. The writers of Deep Space Nine also deserve some credit. Beyond making Quark a complex character and doing the same for other important Ferengi on the show, most notably Rom and Nog, who have two of the most compelling and unexpected character arcs of the entire series, one of the most important changes the writers of Deep Space Nine made to the Ferengi was to hone their satirical edge. The Ferengi were always intended to represent the dark side of capitalism, to which many would argue there is no bright side. But on Deep Space Nine, we see what that really looks like, taking this element of their character from a vague allusion to a pointed critique. A lot of that critique comes in the form of comic beats. We get glimpses of life on the Ferengi homeworld, where we see their preoccupation with profit taken to absurd extremes, like the most important document of their civilization being the rules of acquisition, from which they frequently quote chapter and verse like a Christian evangelist citing scripture, or guests having to pay admission fees when entering private homes, or arriving at appointments and having to buy seats in the waiting room. Naturally, the Ferengi obsession with money extends into their religious beliefs as well. When Ferengi die, their remains are cremated and auctioned off. When Rom wonders if they might have died and gone to the divine treasury after a bit of unexpected time travel in the episode Little Green Men, Quark sets him straight by asking, if this is the divine treasury, why isn't it made of pure latinum? Where's the blessed exchequer? Where are the celestial auctioneers, and why aren't we bidding for our new lives? That stuff is pretty fun, but it's not all a barrel of razor-toothed laughs. We also see, clearly, the toxic misogyny that pervades Ferengi society. Ferengi women are prohibited from leaving the homeworld, conducting business, or wearing clothes. They're denied agency, they're denied basic respect. In the last episode of Season 2, titled The Jem'Hadar, Quark pushes back against Sisko's anti-Ferengi prejudice by insisting that humans used to be even worse than Ferengi because, among other things, Ferengi never practiced slavery. He's obviously not including Ferengi women in that statement. Their shitty attitude toward women is something Gene Roddenberry included in his original concept for the Ferengi. Writer-producer Herbert J. Wright attributed this to Gene's, quote, sex fetish. Roddenberry also reportedly wanted to establish that Ferengi men were extremely well endowed by giving them huge cod pieces, until Wright talked him out of it. So, the next time someone whines about the new Star Trek shows not being real Star Trek because they're not family-friendly enough, remind them that Gene Roddenberry had to be dissuaded from giving the Ferengi gigantic cocks and then tell them to shut the hell up and watch something else. Just watch something else! Anyway, it may have originated from what a gross pervert the creator of Star Trek was, but the misogyny of the Ferengi fits right in with the rest of their culture. Unfettered, amoral capitalism, putting personal enrichment above all other concerns, encourages you to commodify everything, even other people. In fact, as history shows us, especially other people. I also don't think it's a coincidence that in our own culture, many of the loudest voices arguing for deregulation, lower taxes, and other policies that benefit only the very wealthy are the same as those which have spent decades fighting to deprive women of equal pay and bodily autonomy. Misogyny isn't just another random trait the Ferengi have in addition to their compulsive greed. It's a comorbidity. The writers of Deep Space Nine also use the Ferengi to critique how destructive traditional assumptions related to masculinity can be to men. They do this by showing how hypocritical and self-defeating the treatment of women can be in episodes like Rules of Acquisition and Family Business, where male characters see their own fortunes, in both senses of the word, jeopardized by their mistreatment of the women in their lives. But they also do it through the character of Rom, who starts out as Quark's dim-witted sidekick, but is eventually revealed to be a frustrated mechanical genius who isn't particularly good at or interested in business, but who pursued profit because his society taught him that's what a good Ferengi, code for a real man, does. It's not until Rom breaks free of the narrow-minded expectations of his culture, first by defying Ferengi law to form a labor union, then by quitting his job at Quark's to become an engineer on the station, that he's able to finally be himself and be happy. Nog's character arc is broadly similar. Like Rom, Nog bucks Ferengi tradition, breaking free of the role that's been prescribed for him by society to chart his own course by joining Starfleet instead of chasing profit. Of course, the writers did more with the Ferengi than use them for sharper satire. They also did quite a bit of world building. I generally find world building pretty boring when it's done for its own sake at the expense of character and story, but luckily, this is Deep Space Nine, so the world building is done at the service of character and story. For example, when Nog and Chief O'Brien are forced to do a bit of wheeling and dealing in order to obtain necessary parts for repairing the Defiant early in Season 7, Nog introduces the Chief and us to the central concept of Ferengi philosophy and spirituality, the Great Material Continuum, which frames the entire universe as a river that redistributes resources from one planet to another, allowing Ferengi entrepreneurs the opportunity to earn or lose fortunes along the way. We also find out that the Ferengi head of state is the Grand Nagus, which we learn in the first season of DS9 when we meet Zek, who is the Grand Nagus for most of the series. And we learn that the most powerful and feared agency of the Ferengi government is the Ferengi Commerce Authority, represented on screen by Quark's most persistent recurring nemesis, other than Odo, of course, Liquidator Brunt, who likes to announce his presence by proudly declaring, Brunt, FCA. In fact, we meet so many fun Ferengi characters on Deep Space Nine over the years, why don't I save time and just tell you about an episode where a bunch of them show up at once? I'm talking about an episode from DS9's 6th season titled The Magnificent Ferengi. The only important Ferengi recurring character not to appear in this episode is Grand Nagus Zek, although his message to Quark during the teaser delivered by Quark's waiter Broik is the inciting incident of the episode. Zek's message informs Quark that Quark's mother, Ishka, has been abducted by the Dominion. No, wait, the abduction would be the inciting incident. Quark receiving the message and learning about the abduction is the key incident. People get those two confused a lot because they're each an example of screenwriting jargon that doesn't actually matter outside the context of a film class. You understand. Anyway, Ishka has been abducted, and Zek is offering Quark a reward of 50 bars of gold-pressed latinum if he can get her back. Quark offers to split the reward with Rom. Quark claiming the greater share for himself, of course. He's the one with the lobes for business, after all. But Rom suggests that they hire alien mercenaries to rescue their mother. Quark rejects that idea, wanting to prove that Ferengi can be just as tough as the other stereotypically badass species, and also not wanting to spend a bunch of his reward money to hire soldiers of fortune. Again, the lobes. Quark proposes recruiting a team of fellow Ferengi to retrieve their mother, and lying to them about the size of the reward they're splitting, which makes sense on two levels. If Quark gets away with it, he pockets more latinum, and if the other Ferengi find out he's bullshitting them about how big the reward is, at least he won't have to worry about getting his ass kicked too badly. So obviously their first recruit is Nog, who's like, not it. And Quark and Rom are like, what do you mean, not it? We're rescuing your grandmother from the Dominion, and the Grand Nagus is paying us to do it. Yeah, but I'm a Starfleet officer now. I have responsibilities. I can't be doing this Ferengi shit anymore. We'll make you the drill sergeant. Okay, I'm in. Their next recruit is Lek, who is also something of an outlier in his society. He's a professional assassin. Other Ferengi look at him a little sideways because he cares more about killing folks than earning profit. Lek's hoping to get to waste some Dominion goons, so he's in right away. And speaking of killing folks, Quark then travels to a starbase to bail out his cousin Gala. We last see Gala in the 5th season episode Business as Usual, where he is a prosperous arms dealer. That's another great Ferengi-centric episode, where Quark also becomes an arms dealer until he finds that he can't ignore his conscience, even in pursuit of fantastic profit, and sabotages a deal to sell weapons to a military leader who intended to use them to kill tens of millions of people. Things haven't gone so great for Cousin Gala since then, and he blames Quark. But then Quark shows up, gets him out of jail, and offers him some latinum to join their rescue mission, and Gala's like, on second thought, we're cool. Back at Quark's, the 5 of them are going over strategy, and Nog and Lek bicker over Lek's refusal to address Drill Sergeant Nog as Sir, and then suddenly they realize that they won't be able to rescue Ishka because they don't have a ship. Then, from out of the shadows, steps none other than Liquidator Brunt, and he's like, did someone say chips? No, ship. Did you bring chips? No. Then why did you say that? Because I thought you said chips. So you were just repeating what you thought I said, even though you didn't have chips? Yeah. Anyway, I can see I'm not welcome here, so I'll just fly away. In my ship. Okay, seriously, what did you hear me say? So now there are 6 members of the team, and they have a ship. That's all good, but training isn't going very well. Lek isn't such a great shot, as it turns out. He even kills a holographic simulation of Ishka. He makes an excuse that he wanted to put her out of her misery once he realized the rescue mission would fail, which is humane, but also contrary to, the whole purpose of the operation. It's starting to come home to Quark that they aren't very good commandos, so Rom suggests that instead of attempting a military-style mission, they contact Ishka's captors and negotiate for her release. They do, and with some help from Captain Sisko, they gain custody of a prisoner to exchange for Ishka. That prisoner is Keevan, the Vorta captured by Sisko and crew during the episode Rocks and Shoals back at the start of the season. He comes aboard Brunt's ship as they prepare to leave, and he's like, "You're all gonna die." What a delight you are, Keevan. The prisoner exchange is set to take place on Empok Nor, the nearby abandoned space station that is identical to Deep Space Nine, but is definitely not just Deep Space Nine with a bunch of the lights turned out. The Ferengi set up camp in the infirmary. Keevan's like, the Dominion's not coming here to negotiate. They're gonna kill all of you, then they're gonna torture me and execute me. Keevan? Take it easy with the zingers, man. You're killing me. Gala falls asleep while on guard duty, and Keevan makes a run for the ship and tries to escape. He doesn't get anywhere because Quark had Rom disable the ship's engine, so Quark runs in like, "Keevan, seriously, get back to the infirmary. You're our prisoner. We need to exchange you for my mom, you joker. What are we gonna do with you?" "Hand me over to be slaughtered." Cut it out! Soon, a squad of Jem'Hadar arrive, led by a Vorta named Yelgren, who is played by Iggy Pop in one of the most awesomely random and inexplicable guest appearances in the history of Star Trek. Or should I say, seemingly inexplicable, since there is an explanation, and that explanation is that Ira Steven Behr, co-writer of this episode and showrunner of the series, is a massive, lifelong Iggy Pop fanboy, a fact for which we can all be grateful, because Iggy is fantastic as Yelgren, cynical, dry, and delightfully deadpan. Completely off topic for this video, has nothing to do with Ferengi. I just wanted to emphasize that Iggy Pop is in an episode of Star Trek, and it's awesome. Quark and Yelgren have a meeting on the promenade, engage in a bit of haggling over terms, and agree to do the prisoner exchange in half an hour. Quark heads back into the infirmary, where Rom accidentally lets it slip to the rest of the group that Quark is lying about the amount of the reward the Grand Nagus is paying them. Because by this point in the series, Rom has left the bar, joined the station's engineering team, and become his best self. But unfortunately, his best self is still kind of a dipshit. The other Ferengi are enraged that Quark tried to cheat them. Gala grabs a gun and takes a shot at Quark. Quark jumps out of the way, and the shot hits Kevin instead, killing him for a change. Damn, there goes the life of the party. Who's going to crack everybody up to cut the tension now? Somebody better step forward to take the clown crown. Brunt? Looking at you, buddy. No? No. Without a prisoner to exchange for Ishka, it looks like Quark and his team are up the great shit continuum without a paddle, but luckily, Nog figures out a way to control the muscle movements of the dead Kevin using neural stimulators and a tricorder, enabling him to stand and walk. The effect isn't very realistic, though hopefully it'll be enough to convince Yelgren that Kevin isn't dead, but he's just lost his lust for life. It was right there. I had to. Anyway, they pull off the exchange, Nog hiding around a corner and operating Kevin like an RC car. Ishka reaches Quark safely. Kevin walks into a wall. Turns out Nog is no better at driving an RC car than I ever was, which is probably why whenever I got one for Christmas, I'd play with it for like 2 days and then toss it in the bottom of my bedroom closet and never touch it again. Why did I keep asking Santa for RC cars? Yelgren orders his Jem'Hadar to attack, but Lek kills one with a knife, Jack Burton style, and Rom and Brunt kill another with phasers. Quark captures Yelgren, and they all rush aboard Brunt's ship and get the hell out of there, leaving us to watch as the corpse of Kevin mindlessly walks into a wall over and over again in what is easily the most hilariously macabre parting image of any episode of any Star Trek series I've ever seen. Good for you, Kevin. Even when you're dead, you're the funniest guy in the room. Not only is The Magnificent Ferengi a good episode in its own right, it's an excellent representation of how Deep Space Nine managed to save the Ferengi after they got off to such a bad start on TNG. The writers, producers, and performers of Deep Space Nine saved the Ferengi by creating memorable, funny, deceptively complex characters like Brunt and Nog and Rom, and most importantly, Quark. And they saved the Ferengi by using those characters to build out their culture, and then to show that those characters aren't bound by the expectations of that culture. The creators of Deep Space Nine saved the Ferengi by remembering the most important thing about them, the thing they share in common with every other prominent alien species in the Star Trek franchise. They represent us. Possibly accidental anti-Semitism aside, they represent all of us. We live in a culture that pushes us to attach monetary value to everything in our lives, the basic necessities of life, our labor, our time, even each other. And as individuals, we can choose to go in that direction, to be greedy and selfish and motivated by personal gain above all else, or, like Nog and Rom and Quark occasionally, we can choose a different path. We can choose to value other people regardless of if they can put money in our pocket. We can choose to be guided by our hearts and our rational minds, not our wallets. We can choose to do not what is profitable, but what is right. We can choose to be ourselves, our true selves, whether or not we meet society's expectations for what we're supposed to be. We can be us. And sometimes, as Quark and the rest of his team discover on Empok Nor, we can be heroes. Right, Iggy? Oh, no, that's Bowie. Damn it. It was such a good closer, too. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but first I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons, and they are GT Park, thank you GT, Kemp Chalmers, thank you Kemp, Kava, thank you Kava, Dave Mader, thank you Dave, Mike Garcia, thank you Mike, Paul A, thank you Paul, The Tim Caucus, thank you, The Tim Caucus. Mode Select Start, thank you, Mode Select Start. Jared Jonasson, thank you, Jared. And TV for Fun, thank you, TV for Fun. Those are the newest patrons to pledge to support this channel at a level of $5 a month or more. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/SteveShives and pledging any amount from $1 a month on up. All patrons get access to the Patrons Only feed, where you can vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. I could not do this without the support of my patrons. So to all of you who are patrons for however long and however much you're pledging, thank you so much for enabling me to have this wonderful job. And once again, if you want to help out, please go to patreon.com/SteveShives and pledge whatever you think I'm worth that you can afford. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole. The three of us play characters who are low-ranking Starfleet officers. We just started our 4th season, where Jason's and my characters have recently experienced a time jump that took us from the TOS era to the TNG era, where we find ourselves serving aboard the Enterprise D during TNG's 1st season. Our show is a lot of fun to make, and judging by most of the comments we get, it's a lot of fun to listen to as well. If you're not listening, the links are in the description of this video. Please do check out the Ensign's Log. I think you'll really dig it. I also do a weekly watch-along live stream with Dana called Trek Reluctantly, where we watch episodes of Deep Space Nine, which Dana has never seen before, and Firefly, which I have never seen before. We invite you to queue up whichever episode we're watching on your end and watch along with us. It's every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here, so if you're interested and able, please join us for Trek Reluctantly. We'd love to have you. Now let's talk about the next episode of this series. Unlike this episode and the previous episode, both of which were about topics that won the poll the very first time they appeared as choices, next month's episode is about a topic that has appeared in the poll several times before and never won. Until now. And I'm glad it won, because it's a topic I've wanted to make a video about for a long time, centered on one of the true fan-favorite characters of the franchise, and a character I love too. That character is everybody's favorite android, Data, and that topic: is Data actually too dangerous for Starfleet? Ooh, controversial. Should be fun. See you in a month for that one, and see you in a couple of weeks for another comment response video. Those are always a good time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.